Good afternoon, everyone. The town of Hinton respectfully acknowledges that it is located on Treaty 6 territory in Métis Nation Region Number 4. These are the traditional territories and ancestral lands of Indigenous people, including the Plain Cree First Nations, Assiniboine, Winawag, Rocky Mountain First Nations, Stoney, Tsuut'ina, Nakota, Denisuline, Salto, Mountain Métis, and many other communities that continue to enrich the land in which the town of Hinton was established. And with that, I'd like to call this meeting to order at 5:34. Council, any additions to the agenda? Councillor Hawes?
Excuse me. Yeah, I would like to, with council's permission, add a discussion item to start discussing limiting possible capacities in public events, potentially separate from the mandatory mask bylaw tonight, but to have that conversation and see where it goes and potentially look at something for next Tuesday if possible. So that's what I'd like to add.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Council, we have an addition to add a discussion item regarding capacity connected to COVID.
Yeah.
Council, anything else to add? Councillor Stashik.
Not to add, just clarification on Councillor Hawes's request to add. Sorry, was it municipal buildings or is it all public accessible buildings?
I personally, if I may, I'd like to have that kind of broad discussion as a council. I know my feelings on it, but I think it's wide open to that possible discussion when it comes up. So,
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I just had a question. Did we have any requests for a minute with council today? If so, I'd happily make the addition of that.
Ms. Rendell.
No, we had a phone call earlier and she decided she doesn't want to participate.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Administration.
Nothing from administration.
Thank you. If not, I'll entertain a motion to adopt as amended or otherwise. Councillor Hawes.
make the motion to adopt special meeting agenda of September 2nd, 2021 as amended.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Council, we have a motion on the table. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call to question. All those in favor? That's passed unanimously. That'll bring us to our first item for this evening, mandatory face coverings by law 1163. Acting CEO Howard.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, through to council. So on August 31st, at standing committee, administration received the direction to bring forward a request for decision on implementing the requirement for masks at all town-owned buildings and spaces where the town programs and services are provided, as well as a draft bylaw requiring mandatory face coverings for the town of Hinton. Since then, there's been some opportunity to bring this in front of council sooner than anticipated. The provincial COVID cases are trending up, including those particularly in Hinton, in our immediate area. And in the absence of provincial directive regarding COVID-19, several municipalities are acting proactively at establishing some procedures, bylaws, protocols to minimize the impacts of the now fourth wave on their communities, their local economy, and healthcare providers. So what you have before you this evening is a report with a couple of options. One is for your consideration of a community-wide mandatory face coverings bylaw. The draft of that is attached to your package. It is very similar to the one that was established back in November of 2020 and then rescinded in April of 2021. The other option is for your consideration is to move forward with a town facility protocol mandate where the direction is simply for the attendance in town-owned buildings that are where we deliver and provide our programs and services. The service implications of both of those options are fairly similar. We can certainly keep our town service levels the same. And the other thing is with the quick turnaround time, we did not have the opportunity for public engagement. However, there is an option with option A, for example, if you move forward with a bylaw, that you can seek to do that either after first reading or after second reading, or not at all. I think that's about it, and if you have any questions, my team here to support, pass that back to the chair, thanks.
Thank you, Acting CEO Howard. Council. Councilor Nelson.
I'll move that council give mandatory face coverings bylaw number 1163 first reading. We don't get a motion on the table. I brought forward the motion a couple days ago for town-owned facilities, and I think it was actually really good. It spurred on some discussion about it. Ultimately, with where COVID is at right now, I think we need to do more than that. I think passing this bylaw as soon as we can gives everyone the best shot at not having bigger shutdowns in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councilor Hawes and Councilor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will be supporting this. I wasn't in attendance at the last meeting and had opportunity to discuss this. However, I did watch it. And to be honest, at the beginning, I was also of the mind of public buildings and then thought more about it, or in municipal buildings, thought more about it. And, I've been thinking a lot today about it. And I got a couple of comparisons that I think, for me, put things into perspective. For the longest time, we were having a pine beetle issue in our communities all over, and we were doing everything possible to try to prevent the spread of pine beetle. We were removing trees, trying to stop them. We were, looking at a whole bunch of different measures to do things, because it affected our livelihood. And I look at COVID very similar to that. It's affecting people's livelihood. It's affecting their lives. It's taking lives of others, family, friends, community members, and everything that we can do as a municipality to try to stop the spread, I think, is our responsibility. We do wildfires every year. We do wildfire watches. We do protective around our community to prevent the spread of wildfires. And I consider COVID extremely similar to that. And I think it's our responsibility as a council to pass the first reading and hopefully readings to come and protect the community from this virus and the spread of it. It's not to eliminate it, it's to slow it down, to give our healthcare professionals and healthcare facilities the opportunity to get caught up. And it's also, unfortunately, it's affecting those with non-COVID issues accessing our healthcare systems, whether it's locally or whether it's outside of this community where we can't provide the service here. So I'm strong supporter of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hawes. Councilor Magoon.
Yeah, I'd like to make an amendment to the draft bylaw.
Absolutely.
First, you have to pass first reading to get it on the floor, so the council owns it.
Oh, okay, thank you. Then I'll withdraw, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I want to thank Mayor Michaels for calling this special meeting, and also to admin for getting all the information prepared in a timely fashion. I will be speaking in favor of this this motion. I do have to say, how many doctors have to plead with us to get the message across that we are in a very critical state right now? Our hospital is reaching or has reached capacity. Patients are being intubated, they're being transferred to the city. And speaking of people being transferred, every time that ambulance leaves, and I'm hearing when one ambulance leaves with an intubated patient, 2 crews are going with them. That's leaving us in a very precarious spot here in town. If we here in Hinton had a medical emergency, such as heart attack, cardiac arrest, anaphylactic shock, diabetic issues, what happens? We wait for an ambulance if one is not available. So it's not a good scenario, and it's happening right now in our little community. I'm hearing our ambulance personnel are exhausted, they're burned out. It's terrible. So I feel if we delay the decision today, I am fearful we will be contributing to higher numbers coming in the next few days, the next weeks. I cannot help but say, I truly feel it is a slap in the face to our doctors, to our nurses, to our ambulance personnel, if we say no today. We don't believe what you're saying, we're gonna wait a while. I am not content to wait. I will not wait another day. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Race, Councillor Stashik and Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In addition to what's been voiced by the other councillors, I'm also going to be in support of moving this draft bylaw forward. I do want to take a minute, though, to express my displeasure that we were again put in the position through inaction of our provincial government. Healthcare is a provincial responsibility. However, since lifting any restrictions, the government has been largely silent on COVID and COVID controls, which has put municipalities in the position where they feel they're obligated to take steps to protect the healthcare professionals in their community, to protect citizens in their community. And again, I just want to reiterate, I am disappointed that we are again in this position. However, I am, as a councillor, prepared to do what we need to do as a municipality to pick up the slack where the provincial government has dropped it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik, Councillor Magoon and Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And regardless of where the proposed amendment will go, I'm going to be supporting this draft bylaw moving forward. To speak to those people who've taken the time to email council, both in favor and not in favor of this, I want to take some time to, first of all, thank and acknowledge those people that, made the effort to go ahead and email us and discuss in a rational way what their thoughts and feelings were one way or another. But because I'm going to be supporting it, I do want to speak to those people who, wrote in and asked that we not pass this. Many of them in their own little silo who had, basically said or asked in one way or another, where are we getting our advice and our expertise from? And I very much would like to read a quote that we received today from Dr. Andrea Ron, the Community Medical Director for the North Zone. And she said, full-heartedly, every physician wants a masking bylaw to be in place. I'll say that again, full-heartedly, every physician wants a masking bylaw to be in place. Hinton's physicians and all of AHS are in favor of this and are dedicated to deliver service. They will back up a decision to implement mandatory masking. And so when somebody has taken the time to write me and say, well, where have you gotten your expert advice? Based on the hundreds of years of cumulative medical knowledge and expertise contained in that email. That's where I got it from. And not to be facetious, not from Facebook, not from what Joe on the street told me, but from literally hundreds of years of medical experience put together. That's where I'm getting my advice from. And respectfully, that is where I will lay my bets. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have much further or anything new to add. I echo Councillor Magoon's sentiments. All I need to hear is our local healthcare professionals saying we need it, and that's all I needed to hear to be in favor of moving this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. The only addition I'll share with the public is we received correspondence from West Fraser. Almost 1,000 contractors are coming to our community in the next 7 days. That has effects, that could be extremely grave on all circumstances. To take that into account, people coming from other provinces coming here just adds to the reasons. And I do want to take a moment and thank Councilor Magoon for reading that, because one big question is the debate of where this comes from, and for Dr. Ron to bring that forward and share those thoughts, that is the evidence. So I really appreciate it. Really, I think silences some of the criticism of where this comes from, and I also choose to go on that side for that. So thank you for that. Council, anything further before I call for first reading? Seeing none, I'll call to question. Council give mandatory face covering bylaw number 1163 first reading. Council, all those in favor? That's passed unanimously. Councilor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make an amendment to the proposed draft bylaw. Simple enough. I would move to strike section 4.2.1. That, for my council colleagues and anybody watching, that's page 8 of 12 of the report package. And the specific line is schools and other educational facilities. effectively effectively ending the exemption of those facilities. For those colleagues and maybe members of the public who aren't aware, essentially the policy is brought on board at this point with educational facilities strongly recommends the use of masks in many places, but it doesn't go as far as where we were last time. The last time we brought in mandatory masking as a community, masks were already effectively in place in schools, without debate. That isn't the current reality. I've spoken to a lot of community members, a lot of colleagues, and a lot of parents, and they are concerned about this. And so for myself, this is an area that I've tried to get a lot of feedback on. I do want to respect our colleagues at the school board trustee level. This is difficult. And I want to make sure that we take the time to acknowledge that, because it's not meant as a level of disrespect. I think what it echoes and touches on is the concerns that Councillor Ostashik expressed. Town councils and school boards do not have the expertise without outside advice to engage with this type of concern and emergency. This is leadership that should be handled at the provincial level. As Councillor Ostashik pointed out, we haven't received that. So in the absence of that, we have a choice. We can do nothing or we can act. We've received feedback as read today by Dr. Ron that this is the right thing to do. So as a parent and as a counselor, I have to ask myself, what is the right decision? Is the right decision the ethical decision to try and protect the kids that are in our schools? And I think the answer is yes. And in the state right now, there is some leeway around that. There is some choice. And I don't think the safety of our kids should be left up to choice. There is educational choice. If you don't agree with that policy, there's outreach education, there's distance ed education, there's ways around that. That's in place. What is not negotiable is the safety of our kids. And they are the one vulnerable group right now at the younger ages who are not eligible for vaccines. They are the one group right now that is absolutely more impacted by the Delta variant. So I'm asking council to support that at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Magoon. Council, we have an amendment on the floor. If you can keep conversation towards that, have Councilor Haas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be in support of this. I was extremely concerned when the announcement came out by the provincial government that they had no plan for our education system and left it up to every individual board. I felt that was passing the buck from the province over to the school boards. I too respect the fact that they made a decision. I don't agree with it. I agree that it's a vulnerable population that is also bringing potential infection to the families, and it can just, we've seen already that this thing spreads quite drastically. So I think it's a responsibility, yes, as a community. If we're expecting our community potentially to have a mask, then it should be also within our school systems as well, to protect the children and the families of those that are going to schools. I have a lot of faith in the fact that a lot of them would wear masks with choice, but I think that this is the right thing to do as well. So I agree with the amendment and I'll speak in favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Haas. Councilor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple things, a couple questions for admin. One, do we have that right to supersede another governing authority?
Administration.
Thank you. We did have a little bit of time to do that inquiry today through AUMA. Apparently, the school boards could adopt our bylaw, but we would not, they would not be held to the bylaw the way that it is right now. So that was the advice that we've been given today, but we didn't get much more time to inquire back and forth anymore. But apparently schools cannot be held to the bylaw. They must, this must be done through adoption of our bylaw by the school board.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that, Ms. Howard. I was wondering, as a follow-up, have we had any formal contact with either of the school boards?
Administration.
Thank you. We did not, again, have time to do that today. I I know I invited council, that they may have had an opportunity to do that. If you want to put that back to your colleagues, they may be able to answer that better than I can. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then I would, has anyone had the opportunity to have any official contact with school boards? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watt. I have myself, I struggled with this, but in hearing this conversation, perhaps I'm wrong. I think I'm in support of removing it, because to remove it, we're not saying that they have to abide by it. And if it's within our bylaw, they can't approve a bylaw that excludes them from it. So by just omitting it and they're not there, and we're not telling them that they have to be in, then if they have the ability to mandate themselves to our bylaw or tie them to our bylaw, I'm fine with that. And to me, it's actually opposite to have a condition that doesn't allow them if they have that ability. So unless I'm missing something within the bylaw at this moment, I think I support removing it and going with the advice that the acting CEO said. With that, I had Councillor Nelson and Councillor Race.
So I'm not going to be in support of this amendment, and there's a couple reasons for it. The biggest reason is, like, we're hearing now that maybe they adopted, they don't, like, I don't really want to adopt a bylaw that certain people don't have to abide by. That gives me pause for concern. I also have not done any citizen outreach, and largely throughout the last year and a half, I don't understand better the practicalities of a 5-year-old kindergarten kid being masked for an entire day when then they go to gym and reset. Like, I personally have lots of data on adults. I can look at charts, I can look at lots of things, but I can't look at mental health consequences of a 5-year-old being, and I don't know, and our bylaw says 5 years of age or younger than 5 years of age. And so absent of having enough opportunity to understand the implications, I'm going to vote against it. And my concern is that by changing it, then I'm going to struggle to give it third reading tonight. So for me, I'd rather keep it the same, and we can always amend it later. We can actually have that time to consult with the schools and ask more questions about the impacts on youth and transmissibility and all of those things, because we've been briefed on everything else over the last year and a half. I haven't been briefed on this. This is all a new thing to me. So I won't be in support of the amendment, and I'm concerned that amending it to create more uncertainty with it, for me, makes it hard to pass unanimous consent for third reading. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. My apologies, Councillor Race was not in the queue. Oh, Councillor Race.
I thank you, sir. I do have concern now. If we have a councillor who is concerned about this amendment, which I think is a pretty good amendment, which school boards can adopt, he has a concern with this amendment, and that may cause him not to be in favor of the unanimous vote. That causes me concern. Truly.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Haas.
I'm gonna go out of here.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Haas. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When the amendment was first proposed by Councillor Magoon, I was on the fence about it. I was having second thoughts. But the answer to Councillor Waugh's question about whether another governing body has to adhere to a town bylaw actually helped me make the decision that I am going to support the amendment. And the reason for that is because they aren't exempt anymore. They then have the option to adopt our bylaw and apply it to their students if they feel, for whatever reasons that they have, that it's too onerous and it's too difficult to implement, or for whatever reason they choose not to adopt it into their own bylaws, then they are free to do that. So this, to me, I think gives them the option to make a decision one way or the other, whether they want to follow along the town's guidelines or whether they want to go on their own path. And so I will be supporting this amendment wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. I have myself and Councillor Magoon. I think we have two options. And the one I already reiterated, that this, and I want to make it clear to anyone listening, this does not mandate schools to wear masks. Like, absolutely not. It does nothing. So the schools do not have to wear masks if this is hypothetically passed. The schools are not involved in this at all. Now, the other alternative, if there's uncertainty with that, is let's find a compromise or a solution that puts verbiage in that says that schools have the ability to go on what AUMA presented to us and put that within the bylaw. To me, that answers the question, or that puts the clarity or answers the question of lack of clarity of it. Otherwise, again, I want to make it clear, schools would not be affected by this at all. So to me, I see no fear in this affecting third reading for, again, unless there's something in principle or a concept that this would include schools. So unless there's misinformation, which I believe there isn't, I'll be strongly in favor of this. Councilor McGinn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, I'm certainly aware of the political reality for this to pass tonight, which I believe we're all feeling the time crunch involved in protecting public safety and making a decision tonight. I think we're all aware of that. That's why we're having a special meeting this evening. And that's certainly been communicated to me very clearly as a councillor. So I guess I'm going to try and aim my comments specifically towards some of the concerns of Councillor Nelson, because I'd like to earn that unanimous consent. And to alleviate some of your concerns, I would simply say, you don't have to overthink it. We as schools, wearing my other hat, we've already done the work on this. Like, this is something we have done over the past year and a half. We've figured out the complexities around masking students. It's something we've had to do because it's been in place before. So that, combined with the fact that we've heard that this is not going to create a mandate, but the reality is, and let's just be very frank for a moment, is that it puts an element of political pressure on the table, and it says to our colleagues at the school board level, look, we're taking this very serious, we're concerned, and we would like you to as well. I'm very comfortable with that. And there's nothing about that that makes me uncomfortable. And more so, I can go back and I can talk to the other parents and say, look, I did my best to try and exert a little bit of political pressure on our colleagues at the trustee level to say, you need to take this a little bit more serious because we've got medical data that you obviously didn't, that we think you should take a look at. And I will sleep really soundly tonight knowing that I did that. I would really like everybody's support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McGinn. Councilor Nelson.
Yeah, I just haven't had the information to consider all of the points that are brought up tonight. The last thing I saw was that one of two things will happen. They'll push back, challenge your decision, and perhaps they will polarize or divide their students, families, and community further is one of the two things that could happen. So if AUMA has policies in place that it's not part of our agenda package, I haven't had any opportunity to consider it. And so when I don't have time to consider things that could have legal implications, could have political implications, could have health, if I haven't had time to consider that, I can't support it. And that I would much rather see us proceed with what we have and then make amendments as we have time to actually bring a report forward. We called this meeting at what, 3 o'clock today? Like, we don't have the information, in my opinion, to make significant changes to this bylaw. To me, we know what our bylaw does, but things that involve other elected bodies and now the AUMA and provincial government and school boards, that's too much for me. That's just where I am. And I'm not comfortable with something that I don't have the information for. And I just don't know that it's that important to achieve what we're trying to achieve today. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Councilor Hawes.
Well, and I guess to speak to that, I too, you can feel stronger with this, that the fact that we're not mandating schools, we're just simply removing it from this bylaw and giving you that decision. And it's then up to them to make those calls. If it's not within their health, they feel it's not for the health of their students, they don't have to adopt this. We're giving them the opportunity to say, because with this the way it is, then they don't have that opportunity. They don't have that opportunity to bring back to the table and say, look, so it's on them. They can decide if it's health implications, then they can decide not to adopt it. If they have other, reasons not to, they have every right to not to adopt it. I think this shows that we're not handcuffing the school to make that decision. So I agree with Councillor Nelson. If this was saying we are mandating now, not only our community, but the school, but with Ms. Howarth and the work that they got from AUMA, it's just opening that door possibility to the schools. So I think that, removing it is not changing it, other than that then it puts it back, as Councillor Lagoon said, back on the school to reconsider that possibility, right? And I guess I don't totally know how it would work, because I mean, it's a school board decision, which is an entire region. This is the town of Hinton saying it, so I don't know if that's a decision that would then just be made by local schools, or if that would even have to be a school board. I don't know. That's up to them to decide how they then decide for the future of whether masks are not in their schools. So I don't see it in changing it to, I guess, discourage third reading. That's my thought on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The fact that this isn't a binding decision, and the fact that this is an emerging issue, and also the fact that we haven't had any formal discussion with the school board. We don't know what action they may be looking to take anytime soon. I don't want to kick a political football at them if they're going to be doing this on their own volition. I agree in principle that we should be protecting the kids, but by doing this, we aren't doing that. All we're doing is exerting political pressure on another duly elected board that has their own mandate, has their own information, has their own process. And I don't feel the need to make this amendment tonight. I would rather have some sort of formal conversation with other duly elected representatives to see where they're at in the process first. And then if we need to, we can bring back an amendment on Tuesday. Could we not, if we really wanted to, after we had some sort of discussion? It's not that I don't like it in principle, it's that I'm somewhat of the same vein as Councillor Nelson, that I think there's just a better way to do this. We don't have the information in front of us. We haven't had any discussion. I'm more comfortable passing this as is and get through this tonight. And then if we have to make some alterations as the situation emerges, I'd be more comfortable with that. But I'd rather deal with what we know for sure right now.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in taking a couple minutes to read the bylaw carefully and think about the implications of removing section 4.2.1, I can see where there could be the possibility that if it becomes confrontational, there could be a pretty serious discussion about authority and whose authority overrides who. Despite what was said earlier about it simply taking them out of the equation, per the wording of the bylaw, I don't believe that would take them out of the equation. 3.1 says all persons shall always wear a face covering while in an indoor, enclosed, or substantially enclosed public place. So by removing the exemption of the school, then the expectation of the bylaw is that they have to follow 3.1. So I'm maybe not willing to risk, with the knowledge that I have right now, that there comes a confrontation regarding that and whose authority overrides whose. And additionally, the risk of not having third reading pass. So I'm actually going to back up on what I said earlier. And unfortunately, I won't be supporting the amendment, although I support the concept and the principle of the concept. And I look forward to discussing it at a later date and potentially making an amendment. But at this point tonight, I'm not comfortable supporting that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Race.
Thank you, sir. You know, listening to everybody speak, I'm thinking now it would be a courtesy for us to go to the school boards, for us to ask questions, have that conversation, you know, prior to us making the decision on that amendment tonight. It's a courtesy. And I know there are times we have not extended that courtesy. We have not spoke to people to let them know what's happening, and that's come back to haunt us. So I may not support this amendment tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor McGee.
I think the reason, Councillor Race, I would disagree with that is that there's times when the dangers presented through inaction are greater than the dangers provided by not going out and reaching out to fellow colleagues, especially if it's not necessarily going to mandate them to do what we have in the bylaw. And we've received the legal advice on that. So in this case, I guess I'm okay ruffling a few political feathers in order to ensure that I feel like I'm doing the right thing to protect the safety of kids. And that's why I'm bringing this forward right now. And I respect that people have different feelings on that this evening. I'm good with that. But in this case, I think the onus to act is more ethically important in this instance than relationships with school board trustees or doing a little bit of extra research when we already have legal advice. But I'm hearing where things are going, and that's fine, but that's how I feel.
Thank you, Councilor. Yeah, sorry, Councilor.
So I have a point of clarification. I just want to interrupt.
Yeah.
Did we have advice from lawyers on our whole bylaw and how it interacts, or advice from Alberta Urban Municipalities Association?
Administration.
Thank you. So yes, we contacted the AUMA. That is not legal advice. We know that in section 4.2, the reason that all of those groups, authorities are listed and clustered together is because they do have other legislative acts that govern them, and they have other authorities. And so schools are governed by the Schools Act, hospitals have their own, childcare is the same. So that is why the bylaw is proposed to exclude them. And if I could also affirm what Councillor Ostashik said, if you exclude them, you will include them in 3.1 by default, and then there will not be an option, and they will be, we would be forced to enforce that in the schools. And according to the information that we've been given, we don't have authority to do that and jurisdiction to do that. So that's the tough position that it would put that in, which is why they're excluded in 4.2. Everyone else is in 3.1, and the bylaw applies to them unless they're enforced.
Councilor Race.
Thank you, sir. To Councillor McEwen, I look at you as a counselor, but I'm hearing you as a teacher. I am working with kids all the time and wanting to protect them. So Ms. Howard, if we did this amendment, what we would be doing is saying to these school boards, if you like this, you can adopt our bylaw.
Administration.
No, that's actually, no. What that means is that they would have to uphold, we are telling them that the bylaw applies to them and that they would challenge that, and they would likely win that at some point in time. Because I don't believe we have the jurisdiction to do that. They recently determined what the protocols were going to be in their schools. That was done recently, and I'm assuming that they did that with their own information and their own judgment. I don't know that, I'm not aware that they contacted the town to inquire if there was an interest to have a bylaw at that time. But I believe both school boards made that decision at the time based on the interests of the children and the nature of their business. So this bylaw, I don't believe, could be enforceable at the school, in the schools and the hospitals, childcare facilities, anything that's listed in 4.2. That's why they're listed there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Race. I have myself. I want to thank Councilor McGoon for bringing this forward. My opinion, and I focus on the last part that Acting CEO Howard said, they couldn't enforce it. We have stuff in certain policies and bylaws that say something, but then there's different rules that apply in different policies. She's saying that even though this says it in somewhere else, they couldn't do it. They just couldn't. That exists in all kinds of documents we have in the town. But and I won't support the amendment because obviously it sounds like there's some concern with this, even though I do not see it. Our CEO says it would not be enforceable, even though the intent of this bylaw would. So our bylaw would not be able to enforce it based on another principle somewhere else, which happens all the time when we have to look at a different section. But for the sake of third reading and for us to get, convoluted into this, I won't support it because of that. For me, it's disappointing, but I understand, I guess, to some extent. Councilor McGee.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, at this point, I feel like I've received, like, the information I've received it's a little bit conflicting in my head right now based on the feedback from admin. And I'm seeing on the table that it's not going to be supported by council. So in order to ensure that the process is as smooth as possible, I'd just like to withdraw.
Thank you, Councilor McGee. Council, any objections to withdraw the amendment? Seeing none, amendment is withdrawn. Thank you, Councilor McGee, for that. And thank you, council, for the conversation and acting CEO Howard. We are back to second reading at the moment. Council. Councilor Hawes.
I'd like to move the council give mandatory face covering bylaw 1163 second reading.
Thank you, Councilor Hawes. I have one question for council. Section 9. Do we want this bylaw to be in effect today? Section 9 says it's the moment we pass it, it's in effect. Do we have appetite for tomorrow, for Saturday, to give businesses 24 hours to perhaps get some masks? I know most of them probably do. That's my only concern. When do we communicate with the public? Technically, 9.1 says it would start tonight. I know I would trust our bylaw wouldn't be running to places, but we want to clear that up. Councilor Nelson.
I would rather just get it passed. We've had a lot of businesses reach out to us and say, if this helps us, not this hurts us. I'm sure there'll be communications, and bylaw will be educating first, as they have, and communicating first. The way bylaw handled the rolling out of this the first time was done in a way that built actually a lot of trust with citizens and businesses. And I think we're better just to pass it now, providing it receives third reading. If it doesn't not receive third reading, then it gets pushed down to, I guess, if we're not ready to do it today, then we just don't do third reading and then do it Tuesday. But I just don't see the point of waiting personally. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Councilor McGee.
Yeah, I agree with Councilor Nelson. I think the one thing that surprised me with the public feedback this time was that I think, if not near unanimous, there was unanimous support from the emails I received on behalf of businesses to implement this. And I mean, feel free to correct me, council, you received the same emails, I know I did. And because of that, I think rolling it out, essentially effectively, immediately, is reasonable, given, as Councilor Nelson mentioned, the really excellent handling of this bylaw the first time.
Thank you, Councilor McGee. Councilor Hawes.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I think, the sooner the better. And I personally believe that a lot of businesses going through town already staff were masked. There was never an expectation that businesses supply the masks to their customers. If they chose to, they could, or they would, but they don't have to. It's up on the customers. It could be, and I really believe that people were optimistic in a way, but realistic that this was not over and have what's needed to fulfill this bylaw. So I would be in agreement that it starts as worded. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hawes. Council, we have second reading on the floor at the moment. Councilor Waugh.
I wanted to ask, nowhere within the bylaw does it have any sort of thresholds for revisiting. And I was wondering if there was an appetite on council to kind of set some parameters as to when this may or may not, kick in or be revisited in the future.
Administration.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, through to council. We could, trying to think what the best place to put that in. At the very least, we would do what we did last time is we could bring it before council at any point in time, and you could rescind that. It would take as much time to do that. Either way, it would have to come back to council to prompt that, but we could build that in. Then that would likely prompt us to bring it back regardless of if any conditions had gotten better or we had new information. Perhaps miss, okay, so section 8.1 perhaps. Does that suffice or is that?
Councilor Waugh.
I I have no real opinion on the matter. I saw it wasn't in there and I just wanted to start a conversation about whether or not we thought that was important for tonight or whether it could be brought back. So I just wanted to start the conversation and make the observation. I have no real strong feelings at this point. I think the priority is to get something in place, and if we have to make some tweaks to it, then we can.
Councilor Magoo, or sorry, Councilor Nelson, and Councilor Magoo.
Yeah, I think like we added 8.1.2 to have it reviewed the first Tuesday of every month. I think that's fine. Most of the Tuesdays, there's nothing, but that can easily trigger a review or asking administration to bring back a report, or maybe at some point the province decides to govern and make some decisions, and we can do what we did last time, so we don't have overlapping bylaws at that point. So to me, I think that's pretty appropriate, and it'll stay through the election, and so it'll come first Tuesday. If we need more than that, just agenda prep can add it at any point. So thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson, Councilor Magoo.
Yeah, no, Councilor Nelson put it well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Magoo, Councilor Waugh.
Yeah, and thanks again to everyone for entertaining that. I saw that there's a trigger number, but I wanted to see if there was some sort of threshold where we wanted it back. But if we're happy with the timelines that are in there, then that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Waugh. But for myself, I do agree perhaps in the future to have a threshold. If, let's say, this goes on for 6 months, 8 months, to have a mechanism that if it does go under, we can have a future conversation. Council, any other questions, comments, amendments, anything before I call to question second reading? Seeing none. Call to question that council give mandatory face coverings bylaw 1163 second reading. Council, all those in favor? That's passed unanimously. Councilor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that council give unanimous consent for third reading of bylaw 1163, is that correct? If I can speak to it quickly. All the feedback that we've gotten from citizens and businesses, both businesses and citizens are concerned that if the numbers continue to rise at the rates that they are, that at some point that we may be forced into a true lockdown. And that's something that businesses want to avoid. They need to keep their doors open. They need to keep customers in. I want to be able to support them in doing that. And I think part of being able to support them in doing that is to get this passed as quickly as possible so that we are providing the protection that we can, that we have at our disposal to try and limit the transmission of COVID moving forward. I mean, right now there's 1,000 new cases a day, 1,000 plus new cases a day in Alberta. Those are numbers that we were seeing at the peak of the third wave. We're already at them with 70% of the province already fully vaccinated. That leaves only the 30% that's the bulk of those. So to me, that indicates that this variant is highly transmissible. And I think we need to do what we can to try our best to keep it under control while we can before it spreads like a wildfire. So I'd like to see this move to third reading and hopefully pass tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Ostashik. Council, we have a direction on the floor. Councilor Magoo and Councilor Haas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, and for the same reasons why I wanted to withdraw that motion when I saw there wasn't going to be unanimous support for it, I think it is important that we move this forward tonight because it's a time sensitive issue, which I think is why council wanted to see this brought to a special meeting. And so, while obviously we can't control what other councilors do, it's my hope that all of council will support moving forward for third reading tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Magoo and Councilor Haas.
Thank you. And I'm in support of this as well. I think it's proven over the last short time how quickly numbers can rise within 24 hours. Our neighboring community have seen it. We ourselves have seen it. So any delay on trying to control the spread in some way, I think is just not feasible at this point. So I hope that we achieve unanimous consent and move on to the third reading. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Haas. Councilor Nelson.
Yeah, I think anybody that knows me knows how much I dislike unanimous consent for third reading. I don't like it for things that are like really little edits on a bylaw, let alone something that's significant. But I think this is very different. It's between now and next Tuesday. I don't believe we're going to learn any new information that would change my decision on Tuesday. I think we'll get more feedback, but I don't think it's going to be markedly different. I don't think we're going to all of a sudden overnight have a huge reduction in cases. The only thing that would make me think maybe it would be wise to wait would be if there was signals from the provincial government that they were going to do something, which I have not seen. And so for me, the only reason that we wouldn't bring this forward would be if the province was going to do something, and I don't have faith in that at this time. So I'll happily give this vote in favor of unanimous consent and ultimately reduce risk to the amount capable of this governing body. I appreciate it in this case, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. I'll be speaking in favor of this. I want to echo Councillor Stashik's point. The common ground that we do have on either side, whether you're pro-mask, anti-mask, is the fact that no one wants more restrictions. And that has to be a clear message. Nobody wants to experience the closures of businesses, the restrictions on capacity in restaurants, people's livelihoods being at risk. That is a huge factor that I wanted to echo Councillor Stashik bringing up. And I want the community to understand this is for that not to happen. We cannot guarantee that will happen, but we have to get every effort for every business, every resident in this community for us to have less restrictions later. We do not want to go back to online schooling. It is such a difficult experience for children, teachers, everyone. So let's do what we can to avoid those things, because that will be even more divisive for the community. So albeit this will divide it to some extent, we are trying to minimize that divide and get moving forward together as a community, regardless of what side you're on. Council, anything further before I call to question? Seeing none, I'll call to question that council give mandatory face coverings bylaw 1163 unanimous consent for third reading. Council, all those in favor? That is passed unanimously. Councillor Race.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to move that council give mandatory face coverings bylaw number 1163, third reading.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Would you like to speak on it?
I just have to say, I'm very proud of council tonight. I think we're moving in the right direction. And like Councillor Ostashik has said, and people tonight have said, by doing this now, we are going to prevent worse for each from us. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councillor McGreen.
Yeah, and the one thing I would like to express to along Councillor Race's sentiments, the one thing I've seen in different levels of government lately has been the politicizing of arguments like this, health and safety arguments, turning them into essentially politics. Honestly, I just want to say thank you to council and to the citizens who contacted us. Is that I didn't see that creep into the emails that we got. I saw a lot of I think and I feel statements, which that's exactly what we need, right? And that helps us do our jobs properly. And I appreciate the thorough debate the council has had, because I think everybody's brought, I know over the last couple of days, there's been some really good conversations back and forth about this. So I thank everybody for that.
Thank you, Councillor McGreen. Councillor Hawes.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I too, again, I'm quite proud of the fact that we're doing this. And one thing that I want to ask is I do thank the citizens that wrote into us and shared their opinions and everything. And to let the citizens know, this is not an easy decision for me anyway, and I think of council. We are put in place by the provincial government to make this decision. We're basing it on, what we think is best for our community. And I just hope that those, respect that, and that they also please, see it within themselves to comply with this, to try and slow this spread of it down. So I just ask of that. And, again, thank you, and I'll be in support of this. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Councillor McGreen.
Sorry, and there's one more thank you to administration. Thank you so much. There was a lot of research that had to be done over a really short period. I know initially, for those people who don't know, who might be watching this, initially we had said to administration, yeah, bring this back, at the next regular council of September 7th. And then all of a sudden it was like, no, we want to have a special meeting right now, make it happen. So that's a lot of work. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McGee, for saying that. I think we all echo that. It's a lot of work in the past 24 to 48 hours. Council, anything further? If not, I will call to question third reading. That council give mandatory face coverings bylaw 1163 third reading. Council, all those in favor? That is passed unanimously. Council, anything further for our action item for this evening? Councilor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There is in some of the options a speaking point or a motion point. The council direct Mayor Michaels to send a letter to the provincial government, ... I would like to take the opportunity to discuss that with council. I voiced my displeasure earlier that the provincial government has been largely silent on the COVID spread lately, despite the fact that, as I said earlier, we were seeing numbers that are more or less equivalent to what we were seeing at the peak of the third wave, and yet there's nothing from the provincial government about any intention to do anything to try and control that. I would very much like to have a consensus of council to get a letter sent to the provincial government asking them to try to take some action provincially, to step up to the plate, take responsibility for the matters that they are responsible for, which is public health. I would like to, anyway, I want to have a discussion and I want to potentially see a motion come out of that, to have a letter on behalf of council go to the provincial government, encouraging them to do something. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Ostashik. Councilor Hawes and Councilor McGee.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Stashik. I do hope that this will come to a direction and a motion. I think it's important. We've sent letters in the past for various reasons to our provincial government in asking, at one point to lift our restrictions, and because we were being stifled. I personally believe that this fourth wave is demonstrating to be the worst wave that we've had so far. The fact that the provincial government is doing absolutely nothing in what appears to be the worst wave, spreading faster than any of the others. We're seeing numbers increase with no restrictions. We had restrictions with less numbers. It just doesn't make sense. And I think we really need to voice our municipal opinion on how they're governing our province. And I agree full-heartedly that we need to have a letter from us that states that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hawes. Before I go to Councilor McGee and then Councilor Watt, just in the event there's a motion, my only input with that is that if we give a direction to have the flexibility to send it on behalf of council or in conjunction with other regional partners. So then we can talk to other regional partners, and if Whitecourt, Edson, et cetera, want to join our letter, then we send one in conjunction with them, and if not, which I highly anticipate wouldn't be the case, we would send one on our own. So just so it would have that flexibility. With that, Acting CEO Howard.
Thank you. So we did attempt to try to determine for council tonight if there was anything either through AUMA, that organization, or our neighbors that we could again strategically join instead of sort of create ourselves. We were unable to determine that at this time. Again, not that there isn't something, but we just didn't come upon it today. So that's why the recommendation simply says at the very least directly to the province. But I just wanted to let the council know that on a first flush we could not find anything.
Thank you, Acting CEO Howard. Councilor McGee and Councilor Watt.
Yep, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just want to thank our acting CEO for that. And I think then really that's an opportunity for us to be leaders as a community and perhaps a region. So I am very supportive of that idea by Councilor Ostashik, and also the notion by the mayor to look at regional cooperation there to give it a little bit more oomph. My personal truth, the way I see the situation is that the province has abdicated their responsibility for safety based on what's politically expedient. That's what I see. That doesn't make it true for everybody, but that's how I see it. They have been lacking in their leadership in this case, and that has created problems not only for us as a municipality, but for our partners. In this case, we talked about it this evening, school board trustees. There's no reason why school board trustees and municipalities should be having to make decisions that the province should be in charge of. And I would like to think most of us could agree on that, right? So that sets all of us up for failure because they're not doing their jobs. Why? Because it's politically easier for them to sit back and do nothing. And I don't agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Magoon. Councilor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will obviously be in support of the letter to the province, and I like the direction you're going with building a coalition around it. But I also wanted to touch on something that Councilor Magoon raised earlier, and that's with regards to the schools and the school boards. I think I don't know how we approach this, but I think it might behoove us to have a communication with the school boards, alerting them of our decision tonight, and then urging them to potentially reconsider any measures they may take within the schools that they govern. And I think that would be a nice approach to take. And then if there is no action, or if we want to go further and feel the need, then as Councilor Magoon said before, I don't mind ruffling some feathers, but I think there's a better process to take it. And I think corresponding with them, telling them what we decided, and then urging them to potentially reconsider some more intense measures would be the way to go.
Thank you, Councilor Waugh. It sounds like there's some strong agreements on sending a letter to the province. Do we want to put something forward? And then if it's in conjunction, adding the schools within the same motion. If not, we can just at least take care of the first part of it and have a separate motion for the school. Councilor Nelson?
I'll give a shot at something that hopefully allows the flexibility you're looking for there, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that council share concerns in writing regarding
Little screen switcheroo.
Yeah, do you need to flip it?
Yeah,
Sure.
if you switch the screen, then we can see how far behind you are
And
from,
how badly I spell.
no, that's okay. I-
roughly right.
Okay.
In writing regarding COVID governance and leadership with the provincial government.
And
Stressful.
leadership?
Yeah. With the provincial government. My hope with that is you can go, and whether it's us making one and asking other regional partners, however yourself and administration feel has the most desired impact. I just hope that's gives you what you need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Council, we have a direction on the floor. I have no one in queue who is interested to be in queue. I'll support this. It's vague enough where it gives that flexibility. It doesn't say that it's simply the town of Hinton. That's going to be our intent. As Councilor Magoon said, I think it's better if we can get as many voices together for it. Councilor Stashik.
I believe I am in support of the proposed motion. I might need a little more information about what's going to be contained in the document where we're sharing in writing our concerns. Are we foreseeing a call to action? Are we foreseeing because the intent that I was thinking of in sending a letter was more to request the implementation of reasonable restrictions to help control the spread of COVID-19. Mine was much more specific and to the point and to try to drive the government towards taking some action. So if they can be amalgamated in some way, or if the letter is to try to convince the government that there is a real true need to take some action, and if that means reimposing restrictions, then so be it, and it will be supported. I'm not sure. I think there needs to be something a little bit more firm though than sharing concerns.
Councilor Nelson.
Could I potentially ask you to repeat the direction you were going to give in case this one were to be withdrawn?
So the one I was going to give, it's not as general for sure, but it was that council direct Mayor Michaels to send a letter to the provincial government requesting implementation of reasonable restrictions to help control the spread of COVID-19.
like to withdraw the motion that's on the table.
Council, any objections? Seeing none, motion withdrawn. Thank you, Councillor Nelson, Councillor Stashik.
I'd like to make a motion, please. I'd like to move that council direct Mayor Michaels to send a letter to the provincial government requesting implementation.
Yeah, that council.
Oh, well, it's the first part that's in the package that council direct Mayor
Oh,
Michaels
okay.
to send the, yeah, sorry. That's why I went through that part quick. I think I have that.
No.
There we go. Requesting implementation of reasonable restrictions to help control the spread of COVID-19. And if I could speak to it quickly, Mr. Mayor. I think we have a responsibility to try and drive the government towards action in encompassing some of the other conversation that's happened at the table. If there's municipal partners that would want to get on board with that, I would fully be in support of that. I think it carries more weight if it's got the letterheads of several municipalities on the letter, and hopefully it will drive the provincial government to some action. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council, we have a direction on the floor. Any questions or debates, comments? Seeing none, I'll call to question that Council direct Mayor Michaels to send a letter to the provincial government requesting implementation of reasonable restrictions to help control the spread of COVID-19. Council, all those in favor? That is passed unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Stashik and Nelson for that combined effort. Council, Councillor Hawes.
I would like to, and I'm not proposing a direction or a motion at this time, but entertain what Councillor Waugh was alluding to. I was thinking of keep your eyes on your own paper because I was writing notes about a letter to the school board. But if there is a moment to consider in a discussion of council, do we want to send a potential letter? And the reason I'm thinking, it seemed like despite the fact that the amendment was withdrawn, there was some concern of council in how the direction that the school board took, and maybe of some sort of letter to some of our concerns, and maybe even inviting them to a conversation potentially to help us understand possibly the direction that they took. And I guess it goes to I'm using the words of Councillor Grace, the courtesy. I don't believe that we were given a courtesy by that school board to even consider a discussion with the local municipalities on our thoughts. So I just like to entertain or see if the council has a appetite to do that, and and what that looks like. I'm not entirely sure. I think it'll come out of that discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Councillor McGee.
Yeah, I certainly agree, and I appreciate the idea that's been floated by both councillors on that. And I think really format wise, it can be reasonably similar to what was already put forward. So that's something I would happily support.
Thank you, Councillor McGee. Councillor Nelson.
I wonder, all of this is happening so fast. We know what the province has been doing. I think the school stuff is still very fresh. I know there's been a little bit of back and forth. We've learned a few things tonight. I just wondered, with us passing the bylaw, we have to have COVID or masks and COVID on the agenda for next Tuesday, because it's the first Tuesday of the month. I just wonder if giving ourselves an opportunity to have a few more conversations after we've done this, and then bring that direction forward on Tuesday with maybe a little bit more time to consider kind of where we're at with everything.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's my understanding that the GYPSD has a school board meeting on Wednesday. So and I don't know if we need to really have a discussion. Like I said, I think the intent of the letter is to let them know what we've decided and to urge them to maybe reconsider some some stronger mask mandates within the schools, at least in Hinton, you know, so. I don't think that needs to wait. I think it's just a communication and, so, yeah, so, and with the timing of the school board on meeting on Wednesday, I think if we can get that done tonight, hopefully that can get turned around and sent to them in a timely fashion that it could be considered at that point.
Thank you, Councillor Wall. I had the same reservation as Councillor Nelson to some extent, and I'm glad that Councillor Wall brought up that point. This would be a very different tone than the other letter that we're talking about. And I appreciate that clarity. This is about informing them and kind of building that partnership and communicating to them some of our concerns, but this is not anywhere near the other letter. This is more of a communication letter, and I would be in support of that. Councillor Moon and Hobbs.
Yeah, and again, I agree with what you said entirely. I think that lays into what I had said previously. We were lucky enough to receive the advice of, you know, a medical director for an entire region. You know, I don't know what level of medical input that, you know, any of our school boards were given the opportunity to have. And so in this case, yeah, I think that the tenor and the tone are completely different than the province. Like, it is a completely different conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Moon, Councillor Hobbs.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. You know, the letter to the province, you know, is the intent is a lot different than obviously to our school board. But I just do think that we need to, one, communicate and yeah, and maybe voice some of those concerns, you know, invite them to even just listen to this meeting that we had, the discussion that went around the table around that, so that they get some context to it. So, but yeah, I would be in agreement to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hobbs. Council, does anyone want to take Councillor Wall?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we could pull up Councillor Stashik's well-worded direction from before, I'd love to cheat sheet off that if I could. The council direct Mayor Michaels to send a letter to the Grand Yellowhead Public School Division and the Evergreen Catholic Separate School Division it has a the Evergreen Catholic Separate School Division. Informing them of council's mask bylaw decision. And urging them to implement enhanced mask requirements. I don't really have anything else to speak to on that one.
Thank you, Councillor Wall. Council, we have a direction on the floor. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Because our bylaw is face covering bylaw, should we change mask to face covering, or is that being picky? So would that be an amendment?
But that would be your choice, but council, any?
I feel willing to accept that as a friendly amendment for sure. Yeah, that's the proper naming.
Thank you for that, Councillor Race.
Mandatory face covering bylaw?
To quote the actual
So
Yep,
name to it.
mandatory face covering bylaw. Yep.
Masking.
I'm fine.
Councillor Wall, is that good?
I'm fine. Yep.
I would have a potentially a friendly amendment to ask Councilor Watt. The only thing, and I want, I think this is a really good, the only, would you consider the, before the word implement to add consider to implement? Just simply like this is, I think within their purview, but we're asking them to consider it, not just, hey, they're privy to information in their school district that we don't know, but we want to communicate just to consider.
I'm fine with that. The intent is still the same.
Right. Thank you. Council. Any further debate, questions before I call to question? Seeing none. Call to question that Council Direct Mayor Michaels to send a letter to the Grand Yellowhead School Division and the Evergreen Catholic Separate School Division, informing them of Council's mandatory face coverings bylaw decision and urging them to consider implementing enhanced mask requirements. Council, all those in favor? That's also passed unanimously. Thank you, Council. Anything further before we move on to our discussion? Anyone in need of a recess before we go to our second item? Okay, we'll call it a 5-minute recess and reconvene then. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to reconvene this meeting at 6:56. Council, one last opportunity for action item. Anything further for this evening before we move on? Seeing none, thank you, Council, administration. That'll bring us to our discussion item for this evening. And with that, I'll hand it over to Councilor Hawes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start things off with the fact that, again, I'm very disappointed that we're here having this conversation because we're just rehashing now what the province lifted. I have a genuine concern with some of the public gatherings that's been occurring. And I want to reference, and by no means am I an expert on this, so I'm Googling these things and getting the definitions, but my concern is the incubation period, which is the number of days between when you're infected with something and when you might see symptoms. And then when I look at COVID-19, we're looking at anywhere from 5 days to 11.5 days incubation. And unfortunately, looking at not only our community, but I've also been monitoring and taking a look at other communities and the massive numbers that we're seeing, it seems to be coinciding with some gatherings, that has been occurring in the communities. I'm not going to name any, but my concern is the amount of people at it. We all know that, now with the mandatory mask bylaw, that's one level that potentially will protect the spread. But we also know that it's the hand washing and it's the hygiene. And if we don't have people doing that, then the potential for spread is still there. And I'm wondering if council would entertain that discussion on limiting the capacity of. Now, I know that potentially, I'm not going down the road of family gatherings, their own household. I don't feel that as a municipality, even as a province, that might have been a little extreme. But I do think that public gatherings in certain settings, and there's potentially some coming up in the near future that's happening in our community, and this would, at least if we were to go down that road, give them a heads up on if that is something we want to do, then preparing for that. I realize that currently there probably are events, maybe weddings or things like that are planned. I don't see as a council personally that we can necessarily entertain the idea that we curb those ones when plans are already in place, invitations are out, people are always already booked. But I'm thinking future gatherings potentially could be addressed with this discussion. So that, I'm going to leave it at that and get my thoughts or the thoughts of my fellow councilors as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Council. Councillor Nelson.
I share similar concerns, and I think it's good to bring up. I am in no way, shape, or form prepared to make any sort of motion or support any sort of motion, but I think it's a really good community conversation to start having. I know we don't want to name it, but like we have Oktoberfest, we have the gala, we have and so I think a community conversation and even within those groups to none of those groups, as far as I know, have met since the cases went crazy on Monday. So I think just being aware, maybe us as council can do a bit of work to just kind of say, like, where are you guys at? Like, what do you think? I have seen nothing but groups in our community be beyond responsible. To me, the curling event this past weekend, if it was this weekend coming up, they probably don't have it. I think Hinton has been incredibly reasonable and thoughtful and caring and empathetic to the entire community. I feel like the groups themselves have probably made the right decisions, and to try to say, oh, well, if it's something that's already planned or there's tickets, well, there's already tickets sold for all of those things. And so I think it's a really important discussion to have as a community, and I hope those groups are thinking about, which I'm sure they all are. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Stashi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's definitely something that we need to consider, that needs to be out there in the realm of public conversation. If the provincial government continues to be inactive on these matters and case counts continue to climb, I think it's going to again fall to municipalities to pick up the slack. So it's a responsibility I don't relish taking on, but we might have to. But I would have a question for administration, I guess, and it's a legal question. I fully understand if there isn't an answer available right now. But does a municipality have the authority to place those kind of limits on privately owned and operated buildings and areas?
Administration.
Excuse me, I don't know the answer to that, but I may invite our Director of Protective Services to chime in. If anyone would know that off the top of his head, he may, and if not, we can get that information for you.
Sorry, my camera shut off. Thank you, Your Worship and Council.
What's yours?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Oh, your volume is off. It is still off.
Oh, there it goes. Is it still off? Is it still off?
No.
Okay, sorry.
Says his mic's on.
Yeah.
That jurisdiction comes.
Still off.
Under.
He has to
that
connect.
area on mute, he may have to go and select that so he can pick the right one.
Well, if it doesn't have a mic at all, it means that he hasn't connected audio. Now he has,
Okay,
Okay.
but he's
No,
on mute.
if you can try to unmute again.
He was unmuted and it still didn't work.
How can you hear?
There we go.
There's too many mute buttons here. Sorry about that, Your Worship, and thank you. To answer your question, that is under the jurisdiction of the province under the Safety Codes Act. We do have the authority to do restrictions as a municipality. Both myself and the Deputy Fire Chief are Safety Codes officers in the fire discipline, and we can impose restrictions at council's desire.
And thank you for that, Mr. Beaupre. Councillor Stashi?
Good, that's it. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So council, I guess our question is, how does this play out? Like when do we discuss this again? What information do we need? What is a potential setting look like to go down a certain path? What does that look like for us? What would we want? Councillor Nelson?
Yeah, I think where capacity thing came in for me was that's what we did right at the start. We did that before masking. We did that through the soul, so there was no bylaw in place, but we could potentially make a bylaw that just limits based on square footage, we can do those things. How long it takes to pull that together and do it well, I'm not sure. I actually, from a retail and business standpoint, I think there would actually be pretty decent support for it. But I don't know that yet. So I think there's a few things that we can do and a couple paths that we can go down, but I don't know that they're quite as urgent. And again, I think us having this conversation is really good because it'll encourage citizens and businesses and people to reach out to us and share their thoughts, both positive and negative. And honestly, that's one of the really good things about passing the mask bylaw is now we can move on to conversations about other things and have those almost in isolation. So I think we can learn better about capacity things based on already passing the mask bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Councilor Hawes and Councilor Lewis.
Yeah, the only, I guess the thing that I can comment on that is I do feel that it is urgent. Because the fact that without any discussion about it or possibility of direction or motions of council, it continues. And those are unfortunately, those I believe are what are putting the strain on our healthcare providers. And, what I believe personally with looking at is potentially where Edson is at with the capacity of their healthcare center. We are not there yet, but I'm concerned that we may be at risk of that. And I think we've heard that from our medical providers in our community as well. So I feel that just as the mask bylaw was urgent, I do believe that sooner rather than later, having that discussion, I think is important. And because it is, and I think that history proves that when we had those restrictions, masks and with the limited capacity on different things, and that we did control the spread. And this is just showing that we now without it, it's ramping up. So I do think that it's urgent. It spreads quickly. So I too was not expecting a motion or direction of any sort this evening because it is fresh, but I do feel that it's a conversation to be had either at our next regular potentially, or even standing, to take a look at and have, administration bring back, knowing now that we can do that, but what are some of what we've seen in the past and the potential here in town of Hinton. So, and then that too is if there is events occurring, that if that were to come into place, and I realize the tickets are being sold and everything, but COVID doesn't wait for that. And I think that's where we need to really consider that sooner rather than later. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hawes, Councilor Magoon, and Councilor Race.
Yeah, I think in the same way we received a lot of feedback on the mandatory face coverings bylaw, I'd love to have a lot of input from educated professionals in this field again, in terms of like what have been the best practices, provincially, when those limits were in, what does AHS have in mind? What do our local medical community have in mind in terms of, their level of education? What do our emergency first responders feel? Right, having that level of educated input to, if we decide to do something, I think is paramount to making good decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Magoon. Councilor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're having this talk today. We passed this bylaw today because we're concerned about our citizens. So I'm concerned right now, thinking about we may have events coming up, events that are enclosed, where we might see 100, 150 people in attendance. That's a concern to me, and that conversation should stay very alive among council.
Thank you, Councilor Race. Before you go to Councilor Nelson, are we looking for a report, a request for decision, perhaps? I know Councilor Hawes mentioned the 7th or the 14th. I know the 7th would be quite difficult, but are we looking for information for administration to tackle to bring us possible options of what implementations of limiting capacity looks like? Because as Councilor Nelson said, whether it's the soul, whether it's a bylaw, whether it's a policy, should we have that conversation with the structure and what do we want administration to bring? Councilor Nelson?
Yeah, I think where this is very different from the mask bylaw for me is I know the mask bylaw, I know it's involved, I have experience with it, but, you know, when we're talking about gatherings, there's weddings and funerals, religious services. And those have never been something that we've entertained at a council level, and that concerns me in so many ways, because I haven't had that conversation publicly either. I've never been contacted by any of those groups or people looking to do that, because that's never been our jurisdiction. We've never gone down that path. So it seems really troubling to me. You know, and if we're just going to make a motion that likely excludes 2 or 3 big community events, then let's just go to the organizers and politely ask them to make a decision that is in the best interest of the health of the community. So I just worry about passing a bylaw that excludes so many things, or we try to include things, we don't know the unintended consequences of them, just because we don't have that experience with, you know, masks was easy, so we've done it, we know it, we know what the questions are gonna be, we know what the challenges are gonna be. But yeah, going towards religious gatherings is not something I have any, I just don't know enough. And I also don't want to task him in with something that is not realistic either. So just, there's lots of, you know, hazards going down that path. So
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Councilor Hawes.
And I don't disagree with you at all, Councillor Nelson. I agree. I'm not comfortable with this conversation as a municipality either. But unfortunately, that's what the provincial government has put us in a position to have to do. With the health and safety of our community. And I too would rather not be taking, I mean, even having this whole special meeting on masks. I would rather not be in this meeting right now and rely on the providers that are supposed to make those directions, but they aren't. And I do too hate to have that conversation. I don't know either what best practices are. I'm just concerned that if the provincial government doesn't step up, and if we don't, then it's another potential risk to our community. So I would like to, if I may, ask a question of acting CAO. It's actually been a question of mine, and that is the SOL. We activated the SOL a while back during the beginning of the pandemic with less numbers. And we put restrictions on. We're currently at a number that we've not seen in our community in quite some time, but we don't have the SOL activated. Can you speak to that, why that is? I guess I'm trying to understand, because maybe that would change this conversation. So is that possible to speak to that?
Okay. Yes, I will invite a couple of staff to join in. I'm not sure who best to do that. Certainly, Mr. Debrodra, sorry, he's our emergency management director. Mr. Von Claveren was very involved last time when that went through, and I believe Miss Heather Way. So if all 3 of you could join, please, and then let's start with Matt. I'll let you start off, and maybe Hans and Heather can fill in after that. Thanks.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Thank you, acting CEO. It is certainly in the purview of council to enact a state of local emergency. I'm not sure that this fits into the frame of what an emergency would be. We've taken action with the masking bylaw. We can put in provisions, further provisions under that bylaw, and encouraging other agencies to mask up and protect themselves from the spread of COVID. But we could enact a state of local emergency. That's normally done and advise the province, and then the province, we have extra powers under the act to take well, any line of action that we care to do. But in the current state of the province and their direction or lack of direction, there would not be a lot of provincial support for a state of local emergency.
Councilor Hawes.
Yeah, so, and I apologize to bring this up and put, you know, administration a little bit on the hot seat on this, but I guess what comes to mind, Mac, I'm just gonna go with Mac if that's okay. is that, would that then though also put pressure on our provincial government that, hey, we got municipalities now asking for a state of emergency based on COVID? You know, like I look at other things, potentially, our communities have experienced droughts, fires in the state of emergency, you know, so, you know, whether or not they support it, even if we were to do it, would that not send a message potentially to the provincial government, hey, that our municipalities are struggling right now with COVID? We're sitting on our hands doing nothing. And we've got people, you know, because I don't quite understand why our neighbors Edson, at the numbers they're at and the capacity of their hospital, that they haven't done that. So I guess it just comes to my mind that we had one, you know, early on in the days, and then we lifted it, but now we're at a state where we're more cases than we've ever had, but we're not considering that. I guess that's where and it just came to my mind really, you know, in this meeting with this discussion, especially with the fact that if we were talking about limiting capacities, that the Soul would be more apt to do that than say, you know, council themselves and going down that road. So I guess that's where that's where my question and uncertainty is.
So if I may, Mr. DePolpre, because I know Mac wasn't here at that time. I signed off on that and was privy to a lot of that information, but on April 2nd of 2020, we had no mask mandate, we had no vaccines in Alberta, we had so many other variables where the risk was just greater. So in going down this road of COVID that was new for everyone, there was less mechanisms in place. Now, conceptually, now as a council, if we want to have a separate conversation, does this with everything in September of 2021 that is this in our disposal, you know, validate a state of emergency? I think we focus on that. Comparing the two is challenging. Like I said, literally no vaccine. So if an elderly were to get it, you know, they were in jeopardy. Where now, at least there's a level of protection, although still a risk. So to me, that's the answer why it's perhaps not implemented today. That 17 months ago, the landscape was so different. But again, still, I think it's a valid conversation that we may have, whether it's tonight or another day. Also, does this warrant it?
If I may, I appreciate that. It does help to put that into perspective, but I think that possibly that instead of having this conversation potentially of going down the path of do we restrict capacity, that we have that conversation instead, which if then were to be warranted, then would then trigger that as well. So possibly. So I guess that's potentially, and that's why I wanted, I guess, this conversation, because it could bring up other things as well. But and again, I'll leave it at that, and maybe fellow councilors have some thoughts. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. I have Councillor Stashik, Magoon, and Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Rolling back a little bit to the original conversation regarding occupancy and gathering restrictions and concerns about how quickly it could be implemented. And I think we have a fairly proven formula that's already available to us. If it comes down to it, the council feels that there is a need to impose some occupancy and gathering restrictions, and that's the past restrictions that the provincial government had imposed. I think all it would probably require would be taking a look at those, figuring out what the appropriate restriction level is, and possibly adopting those as municipal bylaw. I certainly do hope that it doesn't come to that. I've said, you know, multiple times tonight that I hope the province steps up and takes some action. But if it winds up being that the municipality's hand is forced and they do feel that they have to take some type of action, I think that's a good template that could be adopted and implemented pretty quickly. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Magoon has asked to withdraw. With that, I'll go to Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I'm showing with capacity. I'm going to speak directly to the Soul. To me, a Soul is in place where the democratic process is not practical. And I don't like Souls because it forces administration to make decisions absent of council input. And I don't agree with that when there are opportunities, right? If there's a Soul, we're not having this conversation with community. It's just an arbitrary thing that administration does. What we've done tonight with declaring or passing the bylaw, having those conversations, that means the community owns this, not the town of Hinton organization. And that's where I struggle with anything Soul, with where we are today. I struggled with it at the start too, because I think there could have been time for some of those democratic processes to come through, but we didn't know anything. We know quite a bit now about quite a bit of the things. And so I think for me, the democratic process is pretty important, and I think citizens should have the opportunity to communicate with council and council to make the best decisions on behalf of citizens. So that's why I don't want to solve it. We need to make the decisions, we need to own our decisions, and yeah, I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Councilor Haas.
Yeah, and I apologize for getting off track with the Soul, and I'm not saying that it's just kind of, if that was potential to avoid having to go down the path of getting administration to do things, but I'd like to speak to what Councilor Stashik said, and I think that's valid that we have a formula that the province had, done, and I think potentially, I mean, this is where the conversation, I don't know off the top of my head what the, I'm trying to think of what the term is, but the percentage, of the illness of COVID in Hinton right now, when you compare how many tests versus and what the percentage is. So I don't know if that's something to consider, if we were to ask for a report, but one would be the threshold potentially that we would embark on that. Like, are we at it, or do we wait a little bit? I just don't want to wait too long, and then, things are out of control and then we embark on something, but maybe being prepared with potentially what is a discussion or an administration bringing back to us, what is, potential thresholds that we're looking at with some conversation with the medical professionals, things like that, and get an idea for decision as to, just like we had with the mask bylaw, if it hit 10 or greater, then it would impose that, where maybe this is something to consider for public gatherings too as well in capacities. So.
Thank you, Councilor Hawes. Council, it seems like I'll go to Councilor Race in a moment. We have some options. Do we monitor this? Do we give direction to revisit this on the 7th? Do we give direction for information on the 14th? We have a few options on how to navigate through this, and ideally if we can try to get to what is the appetite of or the will of council, we can move this forward. Councilor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To acting CAO, I wanted to address our fire chief and just get some clarification from him. So, Fire Chief, you had spoke about the Safety Codes Act, and did you say that you and our Deputy Fire Chief are officers of the Safety Code Act?
Through the chair to Councillor, that is correct. Both the Deputy Fire Chief and myself are Safety Codes officers in the fire discipline.
So if an issue did come up, under the direction of council, you could impose restrictions.
We could impose the restrictions that are created by council. That is correct.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councilor Race. Councilor Hawes.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take a crack at it and see what the council thinks of it, but I'd like to make a direction. Whatever you like to do, Sandra. So I'd like to direct administration or council direct administration to bring back a report on possible capacity limitations to public events or public gatherings.
Events or gatherings.
Yeah, this is gatherings. to the September 14th standing committee meeting. And I'm looking, again, we get it out there, if there's any wordsmithing, anything more specific on, amenable to that. I just appreciate the fact that council does potentially want to move forward with some discussion on this, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Council, we have a direction on the floor. Councillor Stashik.
Well, thank you, Mayor Michaels. So I appreciate the sentiment behind the motion and the thought that's gone into it and the intent. However, that said, I don't know that I've got the appetite to task administration with additional work at this point. I think there's quite a bit that is moving forward and that administration has on their plate right now. I think we probably have enough tools in our toolbox, enough experience from what's happened previously with the restrictions that the province implemented, that if it comes down to it, I think that we could probably get something turned around pretty quickly and in place regarding occupancy and gathering limits without having to send administration out to do a bunch of additional work to bring back a report. So that said, as I said at the start of the comment, I appreciate the thought behind it and the intent, but I won't be supporting the motion at this time. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council. Councillor Hawes.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I mean, I think it would be easier too. I think I'm just not certain how easy and fast it could be, but I agree. I mean, it is a lot of work for administration. We've already asked a lot of them and tasked them a lot with, just with the bylaw as quickly as it brought around. And the fact of the matter is just having this conversation, I think is part of the solution as well, to let the community know that there is some genuine concerns. This is, something to consider when and if planning any types of events. My only concern, and I guess it's my, I like to think that people will restrict it, but I guess if there is nothing in place, they may not. And that's my only concern. I mean, I realize, but at the end of the day, these events are either fundraising things that we want to get as much as they can out of it. And I appreciate that. I just, I think that if there was a little more direction possibly. So, I appreciate if this doesn't pass. I don't necessarily disagree with it. But I do hope that if the time does come that this doesn't pass, that we don't wait too long to have that discussion and then look at something a little bit more off the cuff, hope maybe possibly, then have some sort of report with something in place. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. I share the same concerns as Councillor Stashik. I do appreciate this. For me, I'll look for 5 days from now, kind of better understand. I do suspect and I do believe that the province is going to comment and do something to some extent in the near future. And we have that ability, whether it's the SOL or something else, or an action from council to do the same thing. So for that reason, I could revisit this in 5 days and see where the landscape really is. And if there is, then we prioritize that. And administration is tasked with quite a bit right now. That to me is the biggest premise. And we'll see next week from my perspective, but I do appreciate the a sense of urgency. Councillor Race.
Thank you, sir. I just want to thank Councillor Hawes for bringing it up. It is a concern to all of us. It is. But 42 items on the action pending list, that's a concern too. I don't know if there's 42, but there's a lot. So, and I like what you're saying. Let's wait 5 days. The community is hearing what we're talking about right now, and I think they will have input. So anyway, thank you, Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Hawes.
Yeah, and final comments. I appreciate the sentiments. I agree. If this doesn't pass, and I believe it won't, and that's fine. But I do like the fact that maybe 5 days won't change things, or may change things, and I realize there's a lot on the action pending list, but if we're all sick, we can't do the action pending list. So that's, I guess, where I'm at, is we need to try to curb that, that's all. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Council, anything further before I call this a question? Seeing none, I'll call the question on Council Direct Administration to bring back a report on possible capacity limitations of public gatherings to the September 14, 2021 Standing Committee meeting. Council, all those in favor? Opposed? And that was defeated. Council, anything further for our discussion item this evening? Seeing none, I want to thank Councilor House for adding this and council for having this conversation. I think it's important as we move into a time where numbers are going high, and I think we responded to what the community has been communicating to us. And if there is nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Councilor Nelson.
Be adjourned.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson.